Jim, as I prepared to write this sermon, I sort of was thinking what you did. We've got a whole bunch of people at the camp out. It is the last unofficial weekend of summer. It's going to be hot. People are going to try and go where it's cooler. There's not going to be very many people here. Maybe I shouldn't write a sermon. Because who's going to hear it anyway? But I wrote one, and I'm really glad that you're all here. Because while the rest of our congregation is at the beach or enjoying cooler weather wherever they are, we're here finishing up our summer series on the Beatitudes. So over the summer, we have looked at each of the Beatitudes individually, one by one. Today we're not looking at one, we're actually looking at two. And that's not because we've run out of time or we sort of need to hurry up and get on with what's coming next in the fall. It's kind of two reasons. One, they go together. And two, the last one, the ninth one, we tend to ignore and pretend it's been left on the cutting room floor. We sort of go with number 8 and then move on to You Are the Salt of the Earth when we're looking at the Sermon on the Mount. So we're not going to do that today. We're going to keep it all together. Blessed are those of you who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Okay, I have to be honest, that 8th beatitude, the blessed are the persecuted for righteousness' sake, I don't like that one. And it's the one that I wish had been left on the cutting room floor, because I don't want to be persecuted. I don't want anyone to be persecuted, ever, especially not for their faith. And yet we know throughout the world that people are persecuted every single day because of their faith. And here we have Jesus saying, they're the blessed ones. That somehow, maybe, that persecution is a good thing. And I kind of struggle with that. And so I'm very grateful for that 9th beatitude because it's what helps me understand what I think Jesus is doing here at the end of the Beatitudes. It's what helps me sort of unpack the whole thing. It's that last little piece. I gotta find exactly where it starts. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Those are the words that remind us, or maybe are supposed to help ground us in the history of our risky faith. Because the people who followed Jesus stepped out. People who were originally the beginning before Jesus came and told us more about God, the people, the prophets who stepped out to tell the world about this amazing God who loved the world and who loved all people, who called communities, who called leaders to a different, better way of living, risked a lot. And they were persecuted for what they did. So those last words of the Beatitudes are kind of a warning. They're kind of a warning that if we want to follow Jesus and take his ministry seriously, we're going to have to step out of society's expectations, society's roles. And we're going to have to take some risks and go against the things that society says are normative. And you know, societies don't like that when you push against what the status quo. And so societies are going to push back. And it's not going to feel pretty, and we could be persecuted. It's kind of a warning. And that was certainly true for the people in the early church. They experienced persecution in really big and really small ways. Because, you know, you could lose your job for refusing to be a part of a work team that was building a temple to one of the pagan gods. or for refusing to work on the Sabbath. You could lose relationships with family and with friends because you weren't participating in the community celebrations, eating the food that was at parties, because a lot of those community celebrations were temple events. They were celebrating other gods. They were celebrating the emperor. And that goes against the teachings of our God. So they lost friends and they lost family relationships because of that. And some of them even lost their lives because they insisted on following Jesus. But those of us who live here in the United States today don't risk that. We live a pretty comfortable, easy Christian life. It's not risky. It is in other parts of the world. And I just think it's a little bit interesting that here in the United States, where Christianity isn't risky, that church appears to be more stagnant and some would argue declining. And in other parts of the world, in China, Sudan, Egypt, other countries where being Christian is risky, the church is growing and flourishing. And that just sort of leads me to pause and wonder about that. So last week, while this sermon was sort of swirling around and percolating in my head, I had the blessing of being a part of Zane Riding's ordination service. He grew up, for those of you who don't know, in the Salem Church, and it was amazing to be able to see how far he has come and the blessing he's going to be, and that he gets to stay in our region, which is amazing. So Aaron Curtis, who is the minister at Springfield, preached the most amazing sermon, and it was perfect for the moment, for ordination, and it really, I found myself really connecting, that it was really speaking to this idea that I was struggling with of the church and Christianity flourishing where it's risky, where people are persecuted. Her sermon was entitled All In, and she reminded Zane and those of us there that God calls us to live a faith not in bits and parts, but that we need to live our faith all in because God is all in. And that got me thinking about people who live in places where being Christian and following Jesus is risky, because I think they live their faith all in. That they live every day and every moment as if it was the most important moment of their faith and their walk with God. That moment was the most important thing they were doing in following Jesus because it might be the last thing they do. And that got me to wondering how we really live our faith here in the United States. How seriously do we take each moment with God, each moment of following Jesus? Because personally, I don't see us, and I put myself in with this us, and that's not just us sitting in the pews, us in the United States, living out this risky faith. A faith where we are constantly reaching out to the margins, not with a benevolent hand, but with respect and equality, standing against oppression with the oppressed, speaking loudly, professing that our faith is the reason why we are seeking the kingdom of God here on earth, where everyone has enough, where everyone is treated as the beloved child of God that they are. Because when I see Christianity's voice portrayed in the news, I really want to shy away from that label of Christian, and I know a lot of people who do that. Because the voice that I hear is so much judgment and so much condemnation. That Christianity voice, and I would put Christianity in quotes, that we keep hearing the news talk about is the oppressor, not the oppressed, is the persecutor, not the persecuted. And I wonder what Jesus would think about that. Okay, now I don't think that we should be going out in the world looking for persecution. Like I said, I don't want to be persecuted, and I don't want anyone else to be persecuted. I'm still not sure it's a good thing. But I wonder, what would it be like if we really lived our faith all in? Could we continue to sort of sit by quietly, silently rolling our eyes at that very loud voice of Christianity, of condemnation and judgment, rolling our eyes quietly going, oh, but that's not the God that I know. That's not the Jesus I follow. That's not the Christianity I profess. Or would we be forced to step out, to take a risk, to be very publicly, vocally acting to end oppression, to end poverty, to end racism, to end classism, and to be doing that saying that it's because of our faith, because of Jesus, not, well, you know, it's the right thing to do, and sort of try and silence it. Loudly, proudly saying that we do the work we do for the kingdom of God because of our faith. How would our families respond to us? How would our friends respond to us? How would our communities respond to us? Would we be able to continue living our comfortable, safe lives? Or would it be a little less comfortable? Because being all in the life that Jesus calls us to live is not safe and it's not comfortable. You got to give up the life that you know. Jesus' disciples had to give up the life that they knew, the life that they lived every day, to follow him and this ministry that they didn't fully understand what was coming. Paul most certainly had to give up his life of power and privilege to follow Christ. We have a long history in the church of martyrs who gave up their life because they followed Jesus. And I find myself wondering, what do I need to give up to be all in this faith? To be all in following Jesus and continuing the ministry that Jesus gave us? I have to tell you, I don't have the answer for that, but I think it's an important question for each of us to wrestle with and talk about. What does it mean to be all in our faith? To be all in as a follower of Jesus? So there's one little other thing that I wanted to sort of put out there about the Beatitudes as we're sort of wrapping it up and finishing, because we have intentionally looked at each of the Beatitudes individually. And I think it's interesting to note that the Beatitudes begin with this promise of the blessing of the kingdom of heaven, and it ends with the blessing of the promise of the kingdom of heaven. Now that sort of bookending is a literary device that you can see used throughout the Bible to sort of remind the reader and hearer, this goes together, and it's all important, and it's all intertwined and connected. You can't pull out one piece without pulling the rest. It's not individual attributes, it's not individual ideas, and they're not individual blessings. They're all hooked in and contingent on each other, all in the kingdom of heaven. And I think that that's important for us to remember, that they do all go together, and we need to pay attention to them all. And so I'd like to end by reading through the full Beatitudes. And it's not just the words that are going to be up there, but all of the bulletin covers from the summer that go with them. And so I just invite you to reflect on the fullness of what we're given in the Beatitudes. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I love those images because they remind me that the Beatitudes give us a picture of an upside-down world than the one we seem to be living in. They remind me of the world that God calls me to live in, that God calls me to work in, that God calls me to be all in the name of Christ. Amen.